There's a new sheriff in town, and we're going to talk to her right after this here on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
The new 2011 Lexus IS. Wheeled precision.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.
Thank you. I'm Henry Baskin. We're here on Due Process, and today we're going to be meeting Barbara McQuade, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. She's had quite a year, and she's going to share some of her experiences with her. And a little later on, we're going to bring in her Chief of Violent Crimes, Mr. John O'Brien. He's Chief of the Violent and Organized Crime Unit. We'll see him after the break. But right now, I want to welcome you to Due Process.
Thank you, Henry.
It's been quite a career for you, and this past year has been remarkable.
It has. It's been a wild year. I've been on the job now just about 1 year, and I'm so proud that all we've been able to accomplish. You know, I get all the credit, but we've got 115 lawyers and another 100 or so support staff who really do all the hard work.
Yeah, in all honesty, a lot of the work was being worked up by the FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office, and the IRS and people like that. But it was all timing. And when you got there, and you stood up there in front of all those TV cameras and said, I think you said we don't have enough time to put this off. I mean, I saw you standing there after the indictment of several alleged corrupt figures in the city of Detroit. And you grew up here, didn't you?
I sure did.
I mean, you went to school at U of M or wherever. Yeah. So you pretty well knew the culture of the city. And how long have you been with the U.S. Department?
I've been with the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Detroit for 13 years, 12 years as an assistant before getting the U.S. Attorney job. And so with respect to the public corruption case here, you know, there are two really important things to balance. One was doing a thorough, fair investigation, and the investigation had been going on for a long time. But the other thing that was really important is some closure and some finality so that the city can move on. One of the things I said that day is how important it is to make sure people are aware that the current administration has been nothing but helpful, and there is certainly no evidence of public corruption with the current administration. What we've charged relates to the Kilpatrick administration, and so I thought it was important to get that case charged so that we can move on as a city.
And right, get it charged and bring it to trial or bring it to some resolution. How far back can you go in terms of public corruption? How many years? Is there a statute of limitation?
Well, most statutes have a 5-year statute of limitation. But if you use conspiracy theory, if the conspiracy began more than 5 years earlier, you can reach back to the time when that conspiracy began. And in fact, the Kilpatrick case actually goes back to his time not only as mayor, but even back a little further than that to the time when he was in the State House.
In Lansing?
Yes.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. But give us a broad spectrum of what the U.S. Attorney's Office does. I mean, you know, it's all federal crimes, but they range from embezzlement to murder, I assume.
Yeah, sometimes we say it's the best law firm in town. It's the best law job in town because we do so many different things. We are the litigators to the public on behalf of the United States. So on the criminal side, we do criminal and civil work. On the criminal side, it ranges from violent crime to public corruption, terrorism, white-collar crime, a whole variety of things. We've been doing healthcare fraud in a very robust way. And on the civil side, we do civil rights, we do affirmative enforcement of fraud cases like mortgage fraud and any kind of federal program fraud. And we also defend the United States when the United States is sued in court.
Okay, well, how do you get along with the various county prosecutors? For example, Kim Worthy in Wayne County. Do you work together?
You bet we do. One of the things that was very important to me, and our office has had a long-standing good relationship with the county prosecutors, but I meet regularly with Kim Worthy, with Jessica Cooper in Oakland County, all of the county prosecutors. It's very important to have a good relationship because there are some cases that could be brought in either jurisdiction. And so we will frequently talk about a case and try to decide where we can maximize justice, where can we use the fewest resources to get the best and most just result.
Do you have any jurisdiction over the TSA out at, say, at Metro Airport?
Yeah, if there were to be an incident coming through the airport, that is a case that would be handled with our office. For example, the so-called Christmas bomber, Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, is a case that our office is prosecuting because it is a federal offense that occurred in our jurisdiction.
Where does that case stand?
At the moment, the case is awaiting trial. We are awaiting a trial date. We are ready to go for trial, and there is a status conference scheduled for January 25th. The case has been delayed a little bit because the defendant fired his lawyer and said he wants to represent himself, which is fine, but we're ready to go whenever he is.
Is he going to represent himself?
At the moment, that's his plan.
Does he know the law?
He has told the judge he is not trained in the law, but he would like to represent himself.
Don't judges normally appoint someone to sit in and sort of assist?
Yes, and in fact, the judge in this case has appointed standby counsel to assist him. So there is a very experienced criminal defense attorney who is available to stand by.
Okay, so he'll be sitting at the counsel table, and if there's any questions by the client, he can ask him.
Yes.
But he's not going to stand up and make motions or represent him in court.
Right. It's under the law, it's the defendant who gets to make the decisions.
What is the reason why somebody would want to defend themselves? Is there any?
I can't speak for this particular defendant, but we've seen it before, and from time to time a defendant will choose to represent themselves, and there may be a variety of reasons. I think sometimes somebody just wants to have their say and have their moment to say what's going on, but it's rare. It's sometimes more complicated when that happens because they may not know the rules of evidence or criminal procedure, but we'll do our best to make sure we get a just result.
And the judges allow for that. I mean, they're sort of helpful when they do that.
I think everybody is interested in making sure that everything is done fairly, and so I think the judge is probably extra vigilant to make sure that that's done.
The indictments against the alleged conspirators recently in the city came out of the grand jury, right? Can you tell us something about this thing that we don't know about? We know about jurors, we see them sitting there, but the grand jury is something quite unique in the law, so if you could tell us something about that.
The grand jury is a fascinating process, and I would love for every citizen to have a chance to serve on the grand jury, because although it is quite burdensome for members of the grand jury to serve, at the end of it, so many of them talk about it as being one of the most satisfying experiences of their lives. They're selected the same way any other jury is selected. You get a summons, and you show up down at court, and they tell you that you've been asked to serve on a grand jury, which will sit for a period of 6 to 18 months, depending on the particular nature of the grand jury and the investigations that are pending. Most of our grand juries who are doing the 6-month term will report twice a week, every other week, to listen to cases. So it is a fairly burdensome job.
But who's in the room? That's the point. You can't bring your lawyer in the room.
Correct. In the grand jury process, the goal there is not to find whether someone is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but to find out whether there's probable cause that a crime has been committed. It's a procedure put in place to protect citizens from being charged for crimes based on frivolous reasons or someone who's held a grudge against them. So the grand jury is there to listen to evidence, either by an investigating agent who will describe what has happened to believe a crime has been committed, or it's also used as an investigative tool. The grand jury can issue subpoenas to bring in fact witnesses who may otherwise be reluctant to cooperate or provide information, but when brought by subpoena, will answer questions.
And can the grand jury give the immunity to these people?
It can, and that's also a good tool. Sometimes when someone fears criminal prosecution and doesn't want to waive their Fifth Amendment rights, they can give immunity so that the person knows they can't be prosecuted and then are more comfortable giving information.
Okay. So the people in the room are somebody from the U.S. Attorney's Office, one of your attorneys.
Yes.
And perhaps law enforcement.
Yes.
But no other lawyers are allowed in the room.
Right. Now, there's no defense attorney or lawyer for the witness permitted in the room, but a witness may be represented by counsel. The lawyer needs to wait outside the room. There's a client meeting room out there.
Right.
And so if at any time the witness wants to take a break and consult with their lawyer, they are given an opportunity to do that.
Why isn't the lawyer allowed in that room?
Well, it's to protect grand jury secrecy, really. The secrecy of it is also designed as a protection. It may be that someone is investigated and it turns out that no crime was committed, and so that person's reputation can be preserved. That information remains secret. It also remains secret to protect the integrity of an investigation. If everyone knows that an investigation is going on of a certain person or entity, they may destroy records, they may tamper with witnesses. So there are a lot of important reasons why secrecy is a part of the system.
In the course of the Synagro case, the sludge case, we saw TV cameras out there in the federal building showing people going to the grand jury. They were going to talk to the grand jury. I mean, I don't know how that works, or why they should have been disclosed as going to see the grand jury, or coming out of the grand jury and talking.
Well, and I'll tell you, we work very hard to prevent those kinds of disclosures from happening because we believe it harms our case. But there are certain people who know things who we can't control. If a witness wants to say they've been subpoenaed before a grand jury, they're free to tell the world that.
Right.
And so I think that's what happens sometimes is someone says, I've been subpoenaed to appear before the grand jury, or a lawyer for someone who's been summoned to appear before the grand jury may disclose that. Also, you know, the media has become pretty savvy. They know when the grand jury meets, and so they camp out outside the building and, you know, get shots of people going in and out of the building.
Part of their beat. On 2 occasions now, recently, 2 people who pled guilty are in jail. I think I don't know if it's Conyers and Riddle, I'm not sure, have asked for lawyers to represent them, and that's been denied. I'm not sure which one was denied, but the judge said, no, we're not going to appoint a lawyer. Is there a reason for that?
Well, I think what they said, we're not going to pay for a lawyer.
Right.
They certainly always have the right to have a lawyer represent them.
They wanted to have lawyers supplied to them by the federal government or by the group that represents people who are indigent.
Sure, and I think that the judges quite correctly are making sure that when a lawyer is appointed to someone, it's because the person truly is indigent. And if somebody has some funds, they ought to be paying, even if not full freight, they ought to be paying something. So I think the judges are quite correctly reviewing the financial affidavit that the client must submit when requesting court-appointed and taxpayer-paid counsel. And if they're not satisfied that the person truly is indigent, they're refusing to appoint a court-appointed funded lawyer.
So we're hopefully past public corruption. What's the next big thing on your agenda?
Well, one of the areas that we've been working on and we're very proud of is our healthcare fraud efforts. We, this year, as part of our restructuring, launched a healthcare fraud unit because of the tremendous amount of fraud that occurs not only nationwide, but in particular here in Metro Detroit. We have seen a huge number of false Medicare billings. And so, in the past year, we collected millions in judgments, and we plan to do more of that work in the coming year.
When give us an example. A doctor is double billing Blue Cross or triple
Sometimes
billing?
it's doctors and sometimes it's pharmacists. More often, it is these fly-by-night providers who are not even healthcare providers at all, but they will go out and find someone who is vulnerable and say, come on in and sign these forms where it says your arms were tingling. I'm going to say I gave you a nerve conduction test that I'll never give you. And I get reimbursed $3,000 for doing that. Here's your $200 for your trouble. Be on your way. And so in this way, these small fly-by-night clinics can bill thousands and thousands of dollars a day with these fraudulent documents. That's what we're really trying to crack down on.
How do you get to that? I mean, you find the patient, or you look at some extraordinary billing and say, let's take a look at this?
Both ways. In some ways, using data mining of the Medicare records to see who has extraordinary numbers for particular kinds of tests. That's been one way that we've looked at it. The other is tips and informants in the same ways we crack other kinds of cases. There are agents from both HHS and FBI who investigate these crimes. And so just building it with witnesses and tipsters. Sometimes someone is arrested for a street crime and may want to cooperate and say, by the way, I got $200 to go have this nerve conduction test done over at this corner down the street. Thus begins an investigation.
The last time I spoke to you was almost 10 years ago, and we talked about 9/11 at that time. And let me ask you, as a person on the inside, how you feel about our security in their airport security, about our security in general in this country.
Well, I think that tremendous strides have been made in the 10 years since 9/11 in terms of how the government shares information with different parts of it. You know, I think before 9/11 you had a really broken system where the right hand didn't know what the left hand was doing and didn't know what information it had. So I think they do much better in that regard. But that being said, you know, there are some awful people out there who want to kill Americans, and they are determined to do that. So I think that we can never guarantee safety 100%.
See Tucson, Arizona,
Sure.
as an example. Before we go to a break, I just have to tell you, you're right about the grand jury. My mother was on grand jury duty for 6 months. She loved it.
I'll bet.
Not only did she love it, she said, we're all friends and we're going to picnic every summer at the same time. And they did that for any number of years. They sort of brought them all together, and they loved the U.S. attorneys. So
Well, good.
what a nice person.
Good to hear.
I know it's good to hear. But I said, well, Mother, you didn't have a choice. You didn't see any other attorney. But she loved it. And usually citizens who are reluctant to be on juries, they get there and they enjoy the experience. Whether it be a grand jury or a regular jury, they enjoy the experience once they've done it. We're going to take a break. When we come back with one of the chiefs of your department, he'll be joining us right after this. We'll be right back.
Legal referrals and more information on this and other related topics are available on our website at www.dueprocess.tv. There you'll find information on today's program, helpful hints to legal issues, support materials, and lawyer referrals. You can also stream previous episodes of Due Process.
Thank you. We're back on Due Process talking to Barbara McQuade, who is the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, and joined by John O'Brien, who is now the new Chief of the Violent and Organized Crime Unit. Welcome to Due Process, John.
Glad to be here.
John, you and Barbara have been here before, and there's always something new going on in our country. It was years ago we talked about 9/11, talked about aliens, and now we're talking about, aside from Homeland Security, we're talking to you now about violent crimes. How do you decide how the U.S. Attorney's Office has jurisdiction over violent crimes?
Well, the types of cases that we focus on are gang-related offenses, violent offenses.
How would gang-related offenses be come under the federal jurisdiction?
Because many of those crimes revolve around narcotics, weapons, felons with weapons, or robberies that invoke the federal process because they're bank robberies or because they're robberies that involve chains that do business interstate. That allows us to bring the case federally, or to coordinate with state government to determine whether or not we can get a better result in the federal system or the state system.
There was one case that I was reading that you had in your office asking for the death penalty. Was that case tried?
It was tried. It was tried this summer by a group in John's unit.
That's correct.
Okay.
One of the defendants had gone to trial, and we ultimately asked for the death penalty as part of our case.
Well, interesting, because we know Michigan was the first state to abolish the death penalty.
Right.
And now you're sitting here in Detroit saying you want the death penalty. How does that work?
Well, it's the federal system permits for that penalty in the right circumstances after a very involved process that starts in Detroit and goes to Washington, D.C. with the approval of the U.S. Attorney to request that ultimate punishment.
What was the crime? I don't
It
recall.
was a bank robbery involving an armored car service. The men on the armored car were responsible for refilling ATMs along about Christmas time several years ago. And one of the guards was outside of the truck with several $100,000 when the men who were intent on robbing the truck came around the corner and killed him.
And killed him. Because I told you, when I worked for federal Judge Sullivan, we were in Brooklyn. I was watching this woman being tried in the next courtroom. I said, God, she's a lovely woman. She doesn't look like she's a murderer. They wanted the death penalty, and they got the death penalty because she had killed someone on an Army, it was an Army base. So I thought just on federal property, could you ask for the death penalty?
Because banks and credit unions are insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Company, there is federal jurisdiction for crimes committed in connection with those businesses as well.
Okay. Let's talk about the gangs and the drug trafficking. And I want to get down to Tucson if I could, because there's a number of charges that are being brought against anybody, and every agency say we can bring charges. But when you talk about an ATM machine, I mean, that's has federal jurisdiction?
Sure, because of the FDIC and because they're associated with banks.
Well, it would seem that the federal government, your office, has no boundaries. I mean, every crime committed in the state of Michigan, if you look close enough, could be related to the federal government, a violation of some federal law.
It's not quite as broad as that. Regular street crime involving a murder, an assault, robbery, kidnapping that doesn't involve state lines would be purely state in nature. But it is a fairly broad jurisdiction in that if there is a weapon that crossed state lines, drugs, any kind of business that does interstate commerce does have potential federal jurisdiction. And that's why coordination with the state prosecutors is so important. And one of the things John does particularly well is making sure that we have very good communication with our counterparts in the county prosecutor's offices.
Well, I have to tell you, I know you have a great department, but this gentleman sitting next to you is just, he's the best.
Oh, I know it. That's why I put him in charge of our most important program.
I hate to embarrass him, but I've known him so long, and I just tell you, he's just one of the greatest lawyers around. He really is.
Thank you.
Let's go down to Tucson for a second. There's a series of charges that are going to be brought. One involves trying to harm a congressperson. I'm not sure what the statute is called, but they're protected by federal law, right?
Assault or attempted murder of a federal employee is a federal crime.
Of any federal employee?
Yes.
Okay, so not necessarily a congressperson or a senator.
Right.
What are the other charges that they could bring, that the federal government could bring? And I assume the federal government's all over this case. Federal judge was...
The federal judge was killed tragically. And that would be a murder case that would be brought under the federal statutes because of his status and his position.
Okay.
There are a host of other people that were killed in connection with that, and felony murder charges could extend to those victims as well. I suspect that they in Arizona will do much the same as we would, is coordinate with their state partners and determine where the most significant charges can be brought, and of course murder is significant regardless of where you bring it.
Okay.
But that provides the protections for the victims' families and attends to all of the things that come with a homicide.
You know, I don't want to talk about state supremacy or federal supremacy, but we have a situation with the open carry issue here in Michigan. A gentleman came to our board meeting at the university and he said, "Hi, this is my holster and I want to put a gun in it and walk around the campus." I said, "Well, you can't do that." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because I said you can't." But it was in Royal Oak recently, they said we're going to open carry. And the Royal Oak officials in Royal Oak, Michigan said, okay, that's the law. Now, is that the law here, that people walk around with guns on their hips in holsters?
Yeah, there's no federal prohibition against that. In fact,
there is none?
No. Our federal offenses typically focus on whether someone is previously was convicted of a felony. They would be a prohibited person, and so that is one of our bread and butter charges. Is a felon in possession of a firearm.
Okay.
Is a frequent charge for us, and some other things. There's some guns that are illegal to possess, no matter what, like a sawed-off shotgun, a gun with an obliterated serial number, certain kinds of automatic weapons.
Okay, those are federal crimes.
Yes.
But what about this open carry, this kind of thing where under the Second Amendment you say, well, I can carry a gun? I mean, what do you guys do about that?
Little we can do from a criminal standpoint, because the weapon's not concealed, so it doesn't fall under Michigan's carrying concealed weapons statutes. And particularly, I think the incident you're talking about had to do with the Arts, Beats, and Eats Festival in Royal Oak.
That's correct, right.
Where you have families and children and lots of people congregating. It's a recipe for trouble, if not illegal.
Well, it's like the Wild West. I mean, everybody was walking around like that. You're saying under the federal law we can't do anything about it, and the state law says you can do it.
Correct. So
that becomes a problem. Aside from that, what are the other bigger problems that we have here? 10 years ago was illegal aliens and people such as that. It was Homeland Security. Now we're talking about corruption that has a way of just knocking the city down, and it's so hard to recover from public corruption and from political officials being corrupt. People have no confidence, no faith in the system. They say, if I want it, I have to pay money in order to get this contract or get that contract. And it's so self-defeating. I'm glad that Mayor Bing is working with you and wants to, say, I'm going to hold a tight rein on this. But what are the other big areas? We have a very diverse cultural community. very diverse, probably more diverse than any other city, or suburbs, I should say.
Well, sure. When you include the suburbs around Detroit, there's a remarkable level of diversity, which I think is a positive thing for an area,
Right.
because you have different cultures and different perspectives, viewpoints. Sadly, Detroit was troubled from a public corruption standpoint, but as well, and what Barb observed in the creation of this unit was it was two ends working against the middle, because you had people who were trying to make a life in Detroit, stay a part of the city and
Oh, yeah.
maintain their homes, and instead of the broader problems the city suffered as a result of an administration, the small groups of people who decided that might makes right, and we'll just take by force the things that we need, begin feeding on their neighbors. Drug crimes, drive-by shootings, and gangs, either loosely knit or more sophisticated, victimizing anybody that came in their path. And that's why we're going to use the tools that we can from the federal system.
I'm getting this wrap-up sign. I have to tell you how pleased I am that you took the time out of your day to come here and talk to people. I really appreciate it.
Major funding for due process is provided by Meade Lexus of Southfield and Meade Lexus of Lakeside, offering a large selection of new and pre-owned certified premium vehicles.
The new 2011 Lexus IS. Wheeled precision.
And by WWJ News Radio 950, keeping you up to date with the latest news, traffic, weather, sports, and business information 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Live, local, and committed to Michigan's future. News Radio 950, WWJ.